Hi, everybody, and happy Tuesday. You have seen both Trixie and I on these prayers before in recent weeks. Several weeks ago, Trixie called us to pray for seniors on the downtown east side, especially seniors who are Indigenous or of Chinese background. And a couple weeks later, I asked us to pray for refugees, both those living overseas and those resettling here in Canada. But we wanted to do these prayers again this week because of something that we've been talking a lot about and something that Trixie has been experiencing very personally, and that we feel called to pray for individually but also collectively, and that is the evil of racism. And I think many of you will have heard on the news or through the link in First Glance last week to the conversation that Trixie had. You will have heard about increasing incidents of racism, particularly against people of Asian background, and Trixie experienced this very personally, and she'll say more about that. And racism has always existed, the evil of it, and it's something we should always be praying about and working for, not just in this time, but we felt really compelled to name it in this time. And I want to say that racism isn't just about what we as individuals think or feel or do or don't think or don't feel or don't do. Racism is also about the systems and structures of our society, of our communities, of our churches, and the ways that we benefit from those structures or are oppressed by those structures. So I can say that I believe that we are all made in the image of God, and I do believe that, and I believe that the body of Christ is meant to be a beautiful picture of the diversity of humanity, and I fully believe that. But even though I believe that, I still benefit and have benefited in so many different ways and all the time from the fact that I am white. And I grew up in Canada, but I also, when I lived in the Middle East, I also benefited from being white. And I benefit from all of this power and privilege that I have through nothing that I have done or earned. And that power and privilege is something that I have used irresponsibly, knowingly and unknowingly. And it's also something that, because I am white, I have never walked down the street and worried about being attacked because I'm white. And so I want to lament and confess today as part of these prayers. And so I lament the evil of racism, of individual racism, but also of structural and systemic racism. And I lament the evil of white supremacy that affects our country and our society and our churches in ways that we have a lot to learn about. I have a lot to learn about. And I also lament and I confess my own ambivalence and apathy. It's easy for me to say that racism isn't a big deal, or that we don't really need to talk about it, or that we've talked about it enough, when I'm not the one experiencing it, when it doesn't personally affect me, and when it's distant from me. And so I confess that ambivalence and that apathy. And I pray that as the body of Christ, we will find new and better ways to talk about this, to pray about this, and to work together for a way forward.
As Dena has mentioned in the First Glance last week, if you had some time to read what happened to me and the conversation I had with two of my amazing Asian women friends about racism, I was walking home. This was about 2 weeks ago when a white man approached me and made some sexual and racist comments. And when I ignored him, he spat on my face. And so this was a really shocking, disgusting, painful, sad experience. And what came out of it was a lot of anger and rage at the injustice of racism. And so I've been using that. A fire has been lit in me, and using that to speak out against racism, and recognizing, again, it's very historical, systemic, very structural, and that even I have benefited from the privilege that I have being on this unceded territory of Indigenous people, Indigenous land, and that Indigenous people have experienced and continue to experience, and with many other people of color, a lot of racism trauma from the colonization. And so this has really grappled me in thinking about what's my own power and privilege and bias. And that part of my power is to actually use my voice and use my stories to speak out and not let the silence and the shame and the fear push us down. And that this is my call out to everybody, particularly people in our church, in our community, to be able to learn, listen, think about what's our privilege and bias time, and how do we counter that narrative, and how do we support people who are doing this hard work, and in your own homes and wherever you find yourself, have these hard conversations about racism and the painful reality today. And particularly as Christians, we're called to speak the truth. We're called to be the light in the world. So what does that mean at this time? How do we stand up courageously? How do we speak the truth? And how do we shine as the light in the world, as we fight against racism and we fight for racial justice and equity?
The Bellhart Confession is a contemporary testimony of the Christian Reformed Church, and it was written as the churches in South Africa faced and confronted and confessed to the evil of apartheid. And part of the Bellhart Confession says, and I'm reading here, that God has entrusted the church with the message of reconciliation in and through Jesus Christ, that the church is called to be the salt of the earth and the light of the world, that the church is called blessed because it is a peacemaker, that the church is witness both by word and by deed to the new heaven and the new earth in which righteousness dwells. And I believe fully that as the church, Jesus Christ calls us to that, empowers us to that, and challenges us to that. And I also believe that we do fail at that. And I, as much as we also live beautifully into it, and along with Trixie, I hope that we can commit together to do the work of learning about racism, of talking together about racism, of learning from one another about racism. And we really hope this is the start of a new and better conversation. And I know it's difficult in COVID times to imagine how we start talking about this. So we'll be hopefully continuing to converse about it. But I would say, I just have to be honest that especially as a white person, I hope that, and I want to commit to doing the work I need to keep doing to learn from people who experience the systemic nature of racism and the individual nature of racism in ways that I don't. Committing to listening to those voices and understanding those voices and hearing what they have to say to me. And I hope that other people in the congregation who are white will commit to that too. And we all have work to do. And I really hope and pray we can do it together in the spirit of peacemaking, of true reconciliation, and of true hope for a way forward. And both Trixie and I are really, really open and happy to talk more about this, or if you have questions or comments, we would love to hear from you and to talk to you. And I know there's others in our congregation who feel similarly. If you're looking for books to read or voices to listen to, and in the email where this prayer was sent, you'll also see a list of resources. So you'll see a link again to Trixie's talk with the Parish Collective. You'll see a link to the Bellhart Confession, and you'll see a link to bystander training, so that especially those of us who are white can understand how we can intervene when we see racism happening. And so we'll link to that. We're also going to link to a video which we are going to end with after Trixie shares a little bit with us. And we're only going to show half of that video, but I encourage you to watch the whole thing. It's from Fuller Seminary. We're going to link to the part where there is a litany.
As Dena mentioned, I am also committing to continue learning more about my own cultural identity as a Taiwanese Canadian, but to also hold space and stand with Indigenous brothers and sisters, Black community, Asian community, and many people of color who are suffering and dealing with racism, and be able to stand true to that and be able to speak hope, particularly in this time, feeling of darkness and hopelessness. How do we speak up with hope and with truth? I found this quote that I was reminded by Lily Watson. She is an elder Aboriginal in Australia, and she's an activist. And this has really encouraged me this past week. She said, "If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, let us work together." There is so much truth in that. And that's because we are all interconnected, and our freedom is bound up with each other. And I've been reading 1 Corinthians 12, which really was poignant for me and encouraging, and I hopeful encouraging for me and encouraging for you also, reminding us about the one body with many members. If one's member suffers, all members all suffers. If one member is honored, all rejoice together. So this is also my prayer for the church to think about 1 Corinthians 12 and let that sit with us. And what does it mean to be the body of Christ? And how do we stand up for each other? And how do we honor each other in the place of peace and hope and truth?
Thank you for sharing in these prayers with us. We know there's no perfect words. We know there's no perfect time. I know that after we're done recording this, I'll think of a million things I wish I'd said differently or better, but we both felt we need to start somewhere. So thank you for joining in these prayers with us, and we will now end with this litany.
But we, your body, rise to give your proclamation once again. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed those who are meek. Indeed, blessed are those who can't speak English, who can't report crimes. Blessed are those who flee uninhabitable homes and endure inhospitable hosts. Blessed are those whose presence is tolerated so long as they are silent and obedient. Blessed are those whose wounds have been treated carelessly. Blessed are those whose murders provoke no outcry. Give us hearts that turn toward one another to say, "You are my people. Today I have become your family."